Imagine waking up on a cold morning in the year 1230, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. What if your greatest daily battle was not against invading armies or cruel rulers, but against your own body? What if sickness was not just a temporary inconvenience, but a constant, looming shadow threatening to steal your life, your strength, your very breath, especially if you were a woman? Number 1. Childbirth complications and the shadow of the midwife. In the year 1230, for a woman, the journey through life was often defined by the perilous passage of childbirth. It was not merely a life event, but a life-threatening ordeal, a moment shrouded in immense fear and uncertainty, where the line between giving life and losing one's own was terrifyingly thin. Every pregnancy carried with it a heavy weight of apprehension, not just for the mother and her immediate family, but for the entire community who understood the grave risks involved. Childbearing was the central purpose of a woman's life in this era, a societal expectation and a religious duty, yet it was also the most likely cause of her early demise. The statistics, though not formally recorded in the way we understand them today, paint a grim picture, suggesting that a significant portion of women would not survive their childbearing years, often succumbing to the very act of bringing new life into the world. Consider the young woman, Elara, barely out of her teenage years, in her first pregnancy. She had watched her own mother and her mother's sisters go through numerous difficult births, some ending in sorrow. Elara's time approached with a blend of anticipation and terror. Her labor began, long and arduous, stretching over a full day and into the night. Each passing hour, her strength ebbed, and the exhaustion became overwhelming. The midwife, an older woman named Agnes, with years of experience delivering babies in the village, worked tirelessly. Agnes possessed knowledge passed down through generations of women, practical skills learned from observation and intuition, but she lacked any understanding of internal anatomy or sterile practices. Tools were her hands, warm compresses, and sometimes herbal concoctions intended to ease pain or speed the process. One of the most terrifying complications was prolonged labor, known then simply as being stuck. Without the modern interventions of forceps, vacuum extraction, or the life-saving cesarean section, a baby that did not progress through the birth canal could lead to catastrophic outcomes. Pressure on the mother's internal organs could cause severe damage, leading to lifelong incontinence or even death from rupture. For Elara, the baby's head seemed to be taking an eternity to descend. Agnes tried various positions, encouraged Elara to walk, then to squat, then to lie down, but progress was painfully slow. The strain on Elara's body was immense, her energy reserves depleting with each ineffective push. The lack of proper nutrition throughout her pregnancy also contributed to her diminished reserves, making her less resilient to the physical demands of such a protracted ordeal. Then there was the ever-present threat of hemorrhage, or excessive bleeding. Even if the baby was born successfully, a woman could bleed out rapidly, especially if the placenta did not detach properly or if there were tears in the birth canal. Agnes, in such a situation, might apply pressure or try to use herbal remedies believed to staunch blood flow, but often, these efforts were tragically insufficient. The sheer volume of blood lost could quickly lead to shock and death. For a woman already weakened by months of pregnancy and hours of labor, this sudden and rapid loss of blood was often the final blow. Historical accounts, though scarce and often anecdotal, speak of women who seemed to be recovering, only to suddenly collapse and perish from unseen internal bleeding or a slow, steady loss of blood that could not be stopped. Infection, too, was a silent and merciless killer. Puerperal fever, often called childbed fever, was rampant. Without understanding of germs or hygiene, the midwife's hands, or even the birthing environment itself, could introduce deadly bacteria into the open wounds within the mother's body. After a particularly difficult birth, a woman might develop a raging fever, chills, and excruciating pain in her abdomen. Within days, she could be gone, leaving behind a newborn and a grieving family. There was no concept of sterilization. Water for washing might be drawn from a communal well, and the midwife's hands, though perhaps rinsed, were not truly clean in the way we understand it. The warmth and moisture of the birthing environment were perfect breeding grounds for bacteria, and once an infection took hold in a body already weakened and vulnerable, there was little to no defense against it. Accounts from the time describe this wasting sickness that would claim women seemingly days after a successful delivery, leaving families bewildered and heartbroken, attributing the illness to evil spirits or a vengeful god, rather than the invisible enemies of microscopic organisms. The sheer number of women who died in the days and weeks following childbirth was a constant source of sorrow and societal instability, impacting the number of orphaned children and the structure of families. Another hidden danger was the retained placenta. The placenta did not come out completely after the birth. It could lead to severe infection and continued bleeding. The midwife would gently try to encourage its delivery, perhaps with massage or by having the woman bear down, but forcefully pulling it out could cause internal damage. Parts of it remained, the woman's body would struggle to expel them, leading to prolonged bleeding and the inevitable onset of infection, often manifesting as a foul discharge and severe abdominal pain, quickly escalating into a life-threatening fever. Medieval medical texts, such as those that drew inspiration from the famous Trotula, a collection of writings on women's medicine, recognized the importance of the placenta's expulsion, suggesting various herbal remedies and manipulations to encourage its release, but these were often inadequate against a deeply adhered or fragmented placenta. The risk of sepsis from a retained placenta was a constant, unspoken fear that often materialized into tragic reality for many women. For women in rural settings, far from any form of specialized assistance, the challenges were even greater. If a difficult birth occurred in a remote village, the midwife might be the only person with any medical knowledge for miles around. There was no possibility of transporting a woman to a hospital in the modern sense. The infirmaries of monasteries or castles were few and far between, and travel for a woman in labor was unthinkable. She was confined to her home, her fate entirely dependent on the skill of the local midwife and her own physical endurance. The lack of emergency care meant that any complication, no matter how minor it might seem in a modern context, could quickly become fatal. Community understood this, and often, prayers were offered for the woman's safe delivery as fervently as for a bountiful harvest or protection from invaders. Childbirth also presented unique challenges for women who were giving birth to their first child, or for those who had borne many children. First-time mothers often experienced longer and more difficult labors, their bodies unaccustomed to the monumental task. Women who had given birth numerous times, perhaps 6, 8, or even 10 times, faced a different set of risks. Their bodies were often worn out from repeated pregnancies and deliveries. They might suffer from uterine prolapse, where the uterus descends into the vagina, or from weakened pelvic floor muscles, which could make subsequent labors more complicated and painful. A woman who had already endured multiple difficult births might find her body less resilient, making her more susceptible to hemorrhage or infection with each subsequent pregnancy. The concept of family planning was virtually non-existent, and women were expected to continue bearing children as long as they were able, further compounding the physical strain and risk. The sheer physical toll of repeated pregnancies, often starting in early adolescence, meant that many women were physically exhausted and depleted by their mid-20s or early 30s, making them extremely vulnerable to the cumulative effects of childbirth. The emotional and psychological toll on women and on their families was also profound. Living with the constant awareness of this inherent danger shaped a woman's entire life. Each pregnancy was a gamble, a test of fortitude. Fear of death was omnipresent, not just for herself, but for the child. The loss of a child during childbirth or in infancy was also common, and this grief would compound the physical trauma. Women who survived difficult births often carried the scars, both visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Some might have chronic pain, others might suffer from prolapse or fistulas, leading to constant discomfort and social isolation due to incontinence. These conditions were rarely discussed openly, and women often suffered in silence, managing their symptoms with whatever rudimentary means they could find. The burden of this constant threat shaped women's identities, their relationships with their bodies, and their understanding of their own mortality. It was a brutal reality of existence in 1230, where the very act of bringing forth life was a dance with death. Number 2, the gnawing ache of anemia and constant fatigue. Step into the daily life of a woman in 1230, and you would likely encounter a pervasive, deep-seated weariness that no amount of rest seemed to alleviate. This was not merely the fatigue of hard labor, though that was certainly abundant. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, often accompanied by a pale complexion, shortness of breath, and a constant, inexplicable chill. This cluster of symptoms points directly to one of the most common and debilitating ailments of the time: anemia, primarily caused by widespread malnutrition and compounded by the unique physiological demands placed upon women. In an age before a comprehensive understanding of nutrition, and with food sources often scarce and unevenly distributed, women were particularly susceptible to this silent thief of vitality. Imagine Alice, a farmer's wife in her mid-20s. Days began before dawn, milking the cow, grinding grain, tending a small garden, fetching water from the well, preparing meals over an open fire, and mending clothes. By midday, a profound weariness would often wash over her, making her limbs feel heavy and her head light. Even the simplest tasks, like kneading dough for bread, felt like monumental efforts. Her lips were often pale, and her fingernails sometimes appeared brittle and spoon-shaped. Alice attributed her constant tiredness to the endless chores and the demands of raising her children, but in truth, it was her body crying out for essential nutrients it simply was not receiving. The primary culprit behind this pervasive anemia was an iron-poor diet. For many common folk in 1230, the daily meal was a monotonous affair, consisting largely of grain-based porridges or coarse bread, with some root vegetables if the harvest allowed. Meat, a rich source of iron, was a luxury, rarely consumed by the peasant class, perhaps only a few times a year during feast days or when hunting yielded a rare success. Even when meat was available, it was often boiled, which can reduce its iron content. Green leafy vegetables, another important source of iron, were seasonal and often not consumed in sufficient quantities. Legumes were present, but their iron content is less bioavailable than that from animal sources, and often, preparing them properly to maximize nutrient absorption was not understood. Diet was calorically dense, but nutrient-poor, especially in vital micronutrients. For women, this already deficient diet was made even more critical by their biology. Menstruation caused a monthly loss of iron, a silent drain that compounded the nutritional deficit. Alice, like most women, had no understanding of her menstrual cycle beyond its regularity, or lack thereof. She simply endured the monthly bleeding, often feeling even more drained during that time. She also likely experienced heavy bleeding during menstruation, which was exacerbated by her anemia, creating a vicious cycle of iron depletion. Without access to iron-rich foods to replenish these losses, a woman's iron stores would gradually deplete, leading to chronic anemia. Pregnancy was another massive drain on a woman's iron reserves. Carrying a child meant supporting not only her own body, but also the rapidly developing body of a fetus, which required a significant amount of iron for its own blood production and growth. A pregnant woman, already subsisting on a meager diet, would find her iron levels plummeting. This not only left her severely anemic and exhausted, but also increased the risk of complications during childbirth, such as hemorrhage, and contributed to poor outcomes for the baby, including low birth weight and increased infant mortality. Elara, the young mother from our previous story, would have certainly suffered from anemia throughout her pregnancy, making her already difficult labor even more dangerous and debilitating. A constant state of iron deficiency also weakened the body's overall resistance to illness. An anemic person's immune system is compromised, making them more susceptible to infection. So Ali's constant fatigue wasn't just a nuisance. It made her more likely to catch the fevers, coughs, and digestive ailments that swept through the village. Each illness further depleted her limited energy and nutrient stores, pushing her deeper into a state of chronic ill health. Pale complexion, often dismissed as merely a sign of delicacy or indoor living for more well-to-do women, was in fact a stark visual indicator of severe anemia, a symptom that was generally overlooked or misinterpreted. Medieval medical understanding of such conditions was, unsurprisingly, rudimentary. Physicians, usually educated in monasteries or early universities, adhered to the humoral theory, which posited that the body was governed by four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Imbalance in these humors was believed to cause illness. Anemia would likely be attributed to an excess of phlegm or a deficiency of blood, but without the understanding of specific nutrients. Treatments would involve bloodletting, which would only worsen anemia, purges, or herbal remedies aimed at balancing the humors. While some herbs might contain small amounts of iron, their efficacy would be minimal against severe deficiency. More commonly, the advice would be for rest and perhaps a slightly better diet, which was often impossible for the common woman to achieve. Beyond iron deficiency, other nutrient deficiencies contributed to women's pervasive fatigue. Vitamin C deficiency, leading to scurvy, though more common in sailors on long voyages, could also occur among populations with limited access to fresh fruits and vegetables, especially during winter months. Scurvy caused bleeding gums, joint pain, and extreme fatigue, further exacerbating the symptoms of anemia. Vitamin D deficiency, due to limited sun exposure and poor diet, contributed to bone weakness and general malaise. These multiple deficiencies created a cumulative effect, leaving women in a perpetual state of physical depletion. The psychological impact of chronic fatigue should not be underestimated either. Imagine living every day feeling utterly drained, your mind foggy, your body aching. This persistent exhaustion would surely contribute to a sense of despondency, irritability, and perhaps even what we would now recognize as depression. A woman like Alice, burdened by her duties and her constant weariness, would have little energy or inclination for recreation or social engagement beyond the absolute necessities. Her world would shrink to the confines of her home and her immediate responsibilities, her spirit dulled by the unrelenting physical drain. Even among wealthier women, while their diet might be richer in meat and varied foods, other factors could still contribute to anemia. Prolonged or heavy menstrual bleeding was common regardless of social standing, and without modern treatments for such conditions, it could lead to chronic iron loss. Furthermore, the constraints of social life, including limited outdoor activity for noblewomen and the constant pressure of childbearing, meant that even with a better diet, they were not immune to the pervasive exhaustion and health issues stemming from nutritional imbalances. Constant demands on a woman's body, whether from arduous physical labor in the fields or the repeated cycles of pregnancy and lactation, coupled with the consistently inadequate diet, made anemia a silent epidemic, profoundly impacting the health and daily lives of women across all strata of society in 1230. It was a condition that permeated their very being, shaping their existence with a constant, low-grade ache of fatigue and a vulnerability to every passing illness. Number 3, the scourge of dysentery and foul water. In the bustling, close-knit communities of 1230, where sanitation was rudimentary at best and understanding of disease transmission was practically non-existent, one of the most terrifying and common killers was dysentery. This violent intestinal infection, characterized by severe diarrhea, often bloody, abdominal cramps and fever, was not merely an uncomfortable illness, but a rapid path to dehydration and death, particularly for the very young, the old, and for women whose bodies were often already weakened by malnutrition or recent childbirth. Culprit was almost always contaminated water and food, a chilling testament to the dangers lurking in the very sources of life. Consider the small village of Oakville. The main water source was a communal well, dug near the village center. This well was also perilously close to the pig's sty and the latrine pits used by the villager. Rainwater would wash animal waste and human excrement into the soil, slowly seeping into the groundwater that fed the well. Furthermore, the village stream, used for washing clothes and sometimes for drinking by those further downstream, was also a dumping ground for refuse and animal carcasses. The villagers, ignorant of the unseen microscopic life that thrived in such conditions, continued to draw their water and consume their food, unknowingly inviting illness into their homes. When dysentery struck, it often did so with frightening speed and intensity. Imagine Elara, our young mother from earlier, now several months postpartum. She might have felt a sudden, cramping pain in her abdomen, followed by an urgent need to relieve herself. It began as watery stools quickly escalated to frequent, bloody evacuations, accompanied by agonizing stomach pains and a rising fever. Each trip to the latrine left her weaker, more dehydrated. Her mouth would become dry, her eyes sunken, and her strength would rapidly diminish. For a woman like Elara, still recovering from childbirth and likely anemic, the toll of such an illness was even more devastating. The lack of understanding about germs and how diseases spread meant that efforts to contain outbreaks were largely ineffective. When one person in a household fell ill with dysentery, it was highly probable that others would soon follow. Shared eating utensils, unwashed hands, and the close proximity of living quarters ensured a swift and brutal transmission. The child might contract it, then the mother caring for them, then the father. The entire household could be debilitated or even wiped out in a matter of days. The very act of caring for the sick, so vital and compassionate, inadvertently spread the disease further. Medieval medical theory, based on humors, struggled to explain dysentery. It might be attributed to an imbalance of hot or cold humors, or to bad air or miasma emanating from swamps or decaying matter. Treatment often involved purges, intended to expel the offending humors from the body, which ironically would only worsen the dehydration and further deplete an already weakened patient. Bloodletting was another common practice, though its efficacy against dysentery was nil, and it would dangerously reduce a woman's already precarious fluid balance. Herbal remedies might be offered, some with mild astringent properties that might slow diarrhea slightly, but none that could kill the underlying bacteria or replenish fluids effectively. The most effective treatment, ironically, was simply rest and fluids, but understanding which fluids were safe was the challenge. Clear, clean water was vital, but often unavailable. For women, the consequences of dysentery were particularly harsh. Due to their roles as primary caregivers, they were often the first to come into contact with sick family members, increasing their risk of infection. If a woman became severely ill, her family would suffer greatly. There would be no one to prepare meals, tend to children, or manage the household. Her illness could bring the entire domestic economy to a standstill. Furthermore, the loss of bodily fluids during dysentery was rapid and severe. In a time when rehydration therapy was unknown and clean drinking water was rare, dehydration was the leading cause of death. A woman could succumb to fluid loss within a day or two, especially if she was already frail. Another aspect of dysentery's impact was its long-term effects on general health. Even if a woman survived a severe bout of dysentery, her body would be deeply weakened, her gut flora disrupted, and her overall nutrient absorption compromised. This could lead to prolonged periods of weakness, weight loss, and an increased susceptibility to other infections. For women already suffering from anemia, a bout of dysentery would plunge them into an even deeper state of nutritional deficit, making recovery a lengthy and uncertain process. Some women might experience recurring bouts, their intestines permanently damaged, leading to chronic digestive problems and a perpetually weakened state. Beyond the immediate illness, the societal infrastructure also contributed to the spread of such diseases. Towns with their higher population densities and rudimentary waste disposal systems were particularly vulnerable. Waste was often thrown directly into the streets or into open sewers that ran alongside homes. Public latrines, if they existed, were often unhygienic cesspits. The sheer volume of human and animal waste meant that outbreaks of waterborne diseases were a regular occurrence, especially in warmer months. Fairs and pilgrimages, drawing large numbers of people from different areas, acted as super spreaders, introducing new strains of disease into local populations and rapidly disseminating them. A woman who traveled to a market town might bring back not just goods, but also the seeds of a deadly illness. The absence of basic hygienic practices, such as hand washing with soap, a concept that did not exist in the modern sense, was a major contributing factor. Hands contaminated by human waste would then touch food, water containers, or other people, spreading the bacterial or parasitic agents of dysentery. Even the preparation of food, without knowledge of proper cleanliness, could introduce contaminants. Dishes might be rinsed but not thoroughly cleaned, and food itself might be exposed to flies or vermin-carrying disease. The fear of dysentery was very real. It was a visible, agonizing death. Unlike some illnesses that might linger for weeks, dysentery could claim a life quickly, turning a vibrant person into a lifeless shell within days. This rapid decline left little time for families to prepare or for medical intervention. The emotional toll of witnessing such a swift and painful death, especially within one's own family, was immense. For women who were so often at the heart of the family unit, the risk of falling victim to this relentless disease was a constant, terrifying reality, shaping their vulnerability and their experiences of sickness and loss in 1230. Number 4, skin infections and the itch of parasites. Imagine living your entire life without the luxury of a hot bath with soap and clean running water whenever you desire. 1230, for the vast majority of women, bathing was an infrequent and often communal affair, if it happened at all, and personal hygiene was a concept very different from our modern understanding. This environment, coupled with close living quarters, heavy physical labor, and constant exposure to the elements, created fertile ground for a multitude of skin infections and the pervasive torment of parasites. These ailments, while rarely fatal on their own, inflicted constant discomfort, disfigurement, and could, if untreated, lead to more serious complications, significantly diminishing a woman's quality of life. Consider Isolde, a woman who spent her days working in the fields, her hands and arms constantly exposed to dirt, thorns, and insects. She would return home caked in mud and sweat. Clothing, often made of coarse wool or linen, was rarely washed thoroughly, and even then only in cold water with harsh ash lye, which did little to truly sanitize it. This environment was ripe for various skin woes. Minor cuts and scrapes, an everyday occurrence for someone working in the fields or managing a household, would easily become infected. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, a simple cut could quickly fester, turning into an angry, swollen sore weeping pus. These infections could spread, forming carbuncles or large abscesses, causing intense pain and sometimes leading to systemic fever and weakness. Left untreated, these local infections could, in rare cases, lead to blood poisoning, a truly terrifying prospect. Beyond open wounds, common skin conditions thrive. Tigo, a highly contagious bacterial skin infection characterized by red sores that quickly rupture and ooze, was a frequent problem, especially among children, and often spread to the mothers caring for them. Fungal infections like ringworm were also widespread. Constant dampness from sweat, lack of proper ventilation in clothing, and proximity of animals contributed to these conditions. Imagine an unceasing itch on your scalp or body, exacerbated by the coarse clothing, and the inability to effectively wash it away. These persistent irritations could drive a person to distraction, making sleep difficult and concentrating on daily tasks almost impossible. But perhaps the most pervasive torment came from parasites. Lice, fleas, and mites were an unavoidable part of daily life. Head lice were endemic, causing constant itching and scalp irritation. A woman's long hair, often covered but rarely truly cleaned, provided a perfect habitat for these tiny creatures. Imagine the relentless itching, the constant urge to scratch, and the embarrassment of visible nits or lice on one's hair. The medieval response to lice was often to comb them out with fine-toothed combs, but eradication was nearly impossible without modern shampoos. Body lice living in clothing seams would also cause constant irritation and could transmit diseases like typhus, though the connection was unknown at the time. Fleas were also a constant companion, especially in homes shared with animals or where straw was used for bedding. Their bites caused itchy red welts, and their presence was a persistent nuisance. Even more insidious were mites, particularly the Sarcops scabii mite, which causes scabies. This microscopic parasite burrows into the skin, laying eggs and causing an intensely itchy rash, especially at night. For a woman, the constant, maddening itch of scabies, particularly in the warmth of her bed, would make restful sleep almost impossible, leading to chronic exhaustion. Scratching would break the skin, inviting secondary bacterial infections, turning a simple rash into weeping, painful sore. The lack of understanding about the microscopic causes of these conditions meant that treatments were largely based on observation and traditional remedies, often with limited success. Herbal poultices might be applied to open wounds, some of which had mild antiseptic properties from tannins or other compounds. Salves made from animal fat mixed with various herbs might be used for itching or dryness. For lice, the only effective method was diligent combing and washing clothes, but without understanding of reinfection from the environment or sharing belongings, complete eradication was rare. Some extreme measures might involve shaving the head, but this was a drastic step and socially stigmatizing. Constant discomfort and sometimes visible signs of these conditions had a significant social impact on women. While skin issues and parasites were common across all social strata, their severity often correlated with poverty and living conditions. A woman with visible sores or constant itching might be subtly or overtly shunned, impacting her social interactions and potentially her marriage prospects. The stigma associated with such conditions, even if not fully understood, added to the burden of physical suffering. The sheer drain on mental well-being from constant itching and irritation should not be underestimated. Imagine attempting to perform complex tasks or engage in meaningful conversations while battling an unrelenting itch. It would be a constant distraction, a subtle but pervasive form of torture. Furthermore, the lack of proper wound care meant that even minor injuries could leave permanent scars, disfigurements, or lead to chronic pain. Deep infection could damage nerves or tendons, leaving a woman with a stiff limb or reduced dexterity, impacting her ability to perform daily chores or skilled labor. These visible markers of past illness and injury were a common sight in the faces and hands of medieval women, a testament to the harsh realities of their daily lives and the constant battle against the unseen world of bacteria and parasites. The struggle against these microscopic invaders and skin ailments was a relentless one, shaping not just physical health, but also the everyday experiences of discomfort, stigma, and the sheer effort required to simply exist in 1230. Number 5. Reproductive health issues and the unseen pains. Beyond the life-threatening ordeal of childbirth, women in 1230 faced a myriad of other reproductive health challenges, many of which were poorly understood, often attributed to moral failings or supernatural causes, and endured in silence. These issues ranged from debilitating menstrual pains to the physical trauma of uterine prolapse and the profound sorrow of infertility, each carrying its own burden of physical discomfort, emotional distress, and social stigma. The lack of medical knowledge regarding the complex female anatomy and physiology meant that effective treatments were scarce, leaving women to suffer through these unseen pains with little recourse. Imagine Miriam, a young woman who had just entered her childbearing years. Every month, she would experience agonizing menstrual cramps, far beyond what we might consider normal discomfort today. These pains, known simply as the monthlies or women's sickness, would often be so severe they would force her to bed, unable to perform her daily chore. She might also experience heavy bleeding, leaving her feeling weak and exhausted, further exacerbating any underlying anemia. Without painkillers or anti-inflammatory drugs, her only recourse might be hot compresses, herbal teas thought to calm the humors, or simply waiting for the pain to pass. The exact cause of such severe dysmenorrhea was unknown. It might be due to conditions like endometriosis or fibroids, or simply extreme hormonal fluctuations in a body already under stress from malnutrition. For Miriam, it was a monthly ordeal, a predictable period of suffering that stole her energy and productivity, reinforcing the societal perception of women as inherently weaker or more susceptible to illness. Then there was the often silenced issue of uterine prolapse. For women who had borne many children, especially those with difficult or prolonged labors, the muscles and ligaments supporting the uterus could weaken and stretch. This could cause the uterus to descend, sometimes even protruding outside the vagina. Imagine the constant discomfort, a feeling of pressure, a dragging sensation, difficulty urinating or defecating, and sometimes even painful intercourse. This condition, which might be called falling of the womb, was a common consequence of repeated pregnancies and strenuous physical labor shortly after childbirth, when the body had not fully recovered. There were no surgical interventions to correct this in 1230. A woman might be advised to wear a pessary, a device made of wood or cloth inserted into the vagina to support the uterus, but these were often uncomfortable, unhygienic, and offered only partial relief. A woman suffering from prolapse would live with constant physical discomfort, often too ashamed to speak of it, leading to further isolation and suffering. The very structure of her body, meant for reproduction, was now betraying her, a daily reminder of her numerous labors. Fertility, too, was a profound and often heartbreaking issue for women. In a society where a woman's worth was often intrinsically linked to her ability to bear children, particularly sons, inability to conceive, was a source of immense personal sorrow and social stigma. While male infertility was not understood or acknowledged, the burden of barrenness fell squarely on the woman. She might be accused of witchcraft, divine displeasure, or simply being unfruitful. Imagine the despair of a woman longing for children, facing the disappointment of her husband and family, and enduring the whispers and pity of her community. She might try various folk remedies, consult wise women, or embark on pilgrimages to seek divine intervention, but without understanding the complex biology of conception, these efforts were rarely successful. The emotional and psychological toll of infertility could be devastating, leading to depression, marital strife, and a feeling of profound inadequacy. Miscarriages and stillbirths were also tragically common, though often unrecorded. The woman would endure the pain and trauma of pregnancy, only to have her hopes dashed by loss. The physical process of miscarriage, especially in later stages, could be agonizing and dangerous, with risks of hemorrhage and infection mirroring those of full-term childbirth. The grief of losing a child, compounded by the physical ordeal, was a private torment for many women. There was little understanding of why miscarriages occurred, perhaps attributed to bad blood, a fright, or a curse. Women who experienced multiple losses might face similar social pressures to those who were infertile, further deepening their sorrow. Infections of the reproductive system, such as pelvic inflammatory disease, often stemming from untreated sexually transmitted infections or complications of childbirth, also caused chronic pain, fever, and could lead to infertility or further complications. Without antibiotics, these infections would fester, causing adhesions and lasting damage to the reproductive organs, leading to persistent abdominal pain and general ill health. The symptoms might be vague and generalized, such as constant aches in the lower abdomen, fever, or unusual discharge, making diagnosis difficult even if a medieval physician were consulted. Medieval medical texts, such as the Trotula, while pioneering in their attempt to understand women's health, often mixed practical advice with superstitious beliefs. They might describe various uterine conditions and suggest herbal poultices, fumigations, or even strange diets to correct imbalances. However, these treatments were largely ineffective against severe conditions like prolapse or deep-seated infections. The modesty expected of women also meant that detailed physical examinations were rare, further hindering any accurate diagnosis. Women were expected to be stoic and private about their ailments, especially those relating to their intimate parts, leading to a culture of silent suffering. The cumulative effect of these reproductive health issues was a profound impact on a woman's life. They shaped her physical comfort, her mental well-being, her social standing, and her very identity. From the monthly pain of menstruation to the crushing weight of infertility or the chronic discomfort of prolapse, a woman's reproductive system was a constant source of vulnerability and potential suffering. In 1230, it was a battleground of unseen pains, fought in silence, with little hope of true medical relief. Number 6, arthritis and the strain of relentless labor. Imagine a world without ergonomic chairs, without pain relievers beyond a few basic herbs, and where physical labor was not just a part of life, but the very essence of survival. For women in 1230, who bore the double burden of domestic duties and often agricultural or craft labor, the constant, strenuous demands on their bodies led to a pervasive and debilitating ailment, arthritis and chronic musculoskeletal pain. This was not a condition of old age, but a common affliction that could begin in early adulthood, slowly grinding away at joints and muscles, leaving women with stiff limbs, aching backs, and a constant, nagging discomfort that permeated every moment of their existence. Consider Agnes, the village midwife, who had spent decades on her feet, bending, lifting, and carrying. Her hands, once nimble and strong, were now gnarled and swollen at the knuckles. Every morning, she would wake with a stiff back and aching knees, making it difficult to rise from her straw mattress. The cold dampness of the winter months exacerbated her pain, turning her joints into rigid, protesting masses. What Agnes was experiencing was likely osteoarthritis, a degenerative joint disease caused by the wear and tear on cartilage, the protective cushion between bones. In her life, there was no escaping the physical demands that hastened this breakdown. A woman's daily life in 1230 was a relentless physical marathon. From dawn until dusk, she would be engaged in tasks that demanded strength, endurance, and repetitive motion. She would carry heavy buckets of water from the well, sometimes many times a day, straining her back and shoulders. She would spend hours kneeling to tend a garden, harvesting crops, or foraging for wild edibles, putting immense pressure on her knees. Grinding grain for bread involved repetitive arm and shoulder movements with heavy stones. Washing clothes, a strenuous process involving beating and scrubbing in cold water, further stressed her joints and back. For women working in fields, the constant stooping, lifting, and swinging of tools like sickles put incredible strain on their spines, hips, and shoulders. Posture assumed during daily tasks, often bent over, contributed to chronic back pain, a complaint that would have been almost universal among women. The lack of proper footwear and support also contributed to musculoskeletal problems. Shoes, if worn, were often ill-fitting and provided little cushioning or arch support, leading to foot pain, bunions, and uneven gait that could ripple up to affect knees, hips, and the spine. Walking long distances on uneven terrain, often barefoot or in rudimentary leather coverings, was another constant source of strain. Beyond osteoarthritis, other forms of joint and muscle pain were common. Rheumatoid arthritis, an inflammatory condition, might have also plagued some women, causing symmetrical joint swelling, warmth, and intense pain. However, distinguishing between various forms of arthritis was beyond medieval medical understanding. Any form of joint pain would likely be attributed to an imbalance of humors, such as an excess of cold or phlegm, leading to treatments like warming poultices or bloodletting, which offered little real relief and could sometimes worsen the condition. Herbal remedies such as willow bark for pain relief, which contains salicylates, a precursor to aspirin, might offer fleeting comfort, but none could halt the degenerative process. The constant pain impacted every aspect of a woman's life. It made sleep difficult, leading to chronic fatigue. It made simple tasks like dressing or combing hair an ordeal. It diminished her ability to work, potentially impacting her family's livelihood. Imagine a woman like Agnes, whose very livelihood depended on her hands, finding them stiff and painful, making intricate tasks difficult. Her ability to knead dough, to mend clothes, or to assist in childbirth would be hampered by the persistent ache in her joints. Pain would not just be physical, it would be a constant, debilitating mental burden, a relentless companion throughout her day. For younger women, early onset of such pain, often due to injury or particularly strenuous labor, could lead to a lifetime of disability. Back injury from lifting too heavy a load, or a knee problem from a fall, could become a chronic issue that limited her ability to work or bear children. Without proper rehabilitation or diagnosis, such injuries often worsened over time, turning temporary discomfort into permanent impairment. There were no physical therapists or orthopedists in 1230. A woman was expected to work through the pain or rest until her body healed itself, which often did not happen completely for significant injuries. The very structure of medieval homes also contributed to physical strain. Lack of proper seating meant much work was done stooped or kneeling. Beds were often hard and offered little support, leading to morning stiffness and exacerbating back pain. Cold, damp conditions prevalent in many homes, particularly during winter, were known to aggravate arthritic conditions, turning discomfort into agony. A woman would find little respite even within her own home. Cumulative effect of relentless physical demands, poor ergonomics, inadequate rest, and a lack of effective treatments meant that arthritis and chronic musculoskeletal pain were an almost inevitable part of a woman's aging process in 1230, often beginning much earlier than we would expect today. It was a silent, grinding battle against the limitations of the body, a constant reminder of the physical toll extracted by simply existing in a world without modern conveniences or medical understanding of the body's mechanics. The women of 1230 were incredibly resilient, but their bodies often bore the heavy, painful marks of their tireless labor and endless duties. Number 7. The nagging anguish of dental decay and tooth loss. Imagine a world where the sweet taste of honey or fruit was a rare treat, but the constant gnawing of toothache was a daily reality. 1230, for women, dental health was practically non-existent, and the vast majority faced a lifetime of tooth decay, gum disease, and eventual tooth loss. This wasn't merely a cosmetic issue. It was a source of excruciating pain, debilitating infection, and profound nutritional challenges, significantly impacting a woman's ability to eat, speak, and even overall health. Without understanding of oral hygiene or modern dentistry, the fate of one's teeth was a grim and often painful downward spiral. Consider Elara, a woman in her late 30s who had already lost several molars and had a constantly throbbing pain in her upper jaw. Her remaining teeth were stained, pitted, and often sensitive to hot or cold. Eating coarse bread, a staple of her diet, was a painful ordeal, as was chewing any tougher foods like dried meat or nuts. She would often have to swallow food largely unchewed, leading to digestive issues and further discomfort. Her breath was often foul, a common complaint due to decaying food particles and infections in the mouth. The primary culprit behind this widespread dental demise was diet. While refined sugars were not as common as they are today, the medieval diet was often high in carbohydrates, particularly grains. Bread, often coarse and unrefined, would easily stick to teeth, providing a breeding ground for bacteria. Fruits, while seasonal and often a luxury, also contained natural sugar. The lack of understanding about the acids produced by bacteria, which erode tooth enamel, meant that no preventative measures were taken. There was no concept of brushing teeth with abrasive pastes or flossing. Best, a woman might rinse her mouth with water after a meal or chew on certain herbs believed to freshen breath, but these did little to remove plaque or prevent decay. Once a cavity formed, it would progress relentlessly. A small dark spot would grow into a gaping hole, exposing the sensitive dentin and eventually the nerve. Pain of a toothache was often described as one of the most agonizing torments. Imagine a constant, throbbing ache that radiated from your jaw to your head, making it impossible to sleep, to concentrate, or to find any comfort. For Elara, these toothaches would come and go, but each time they returned, they seemed more intense, more prolonged. She might try to pack the cavity with a bit of wax or a clove, hoping for temporary relief, but the infection would continue to spread. Unchecked tooth decay inevitably led to abscesses and infections. Bacteria from the decaying tooth would invade the pulp, causing a painful pocket of pus to form in the gums or jawbone. This could lead to a swollen face, fever, and extreme tenderness. Without antibiotics, these infections could spread to other parts of the head and neck, potentially leading to life-threatening conditions like Ludwig's angina or even brain abscesses. While rare, such severe infections could be fatal. More commonly, they would cause chronic pain and inflammation, further debilitating a woman already facing numerous other health challenges. Elara had experienced several such abscesses, each leaving her weakened and with a persistent, low-grade ache in her jaw. Tooth extraction was the only available cure for a hopelessly decayed or infected tooth. This was a brutal and often dangerous procedure. It was typically performed by a barber surgeon, a blacksmith, or simply someone in the community with strong hands and a pair of pliers or crude forceps. There was no anesthesia beyond perhaps a strong drink or a blow to the head. Imagine the terror of having a tooth pulled, wide awake, by someone with rudimentary tools and no concept of pain management or sterility. The risk of infection after an extraction was high, as was the risk of breaking the jaw or damaging surrounding teeth. Many preferred to endure the pain of a rotting tooth rather than face the agony and danger of extraction. The loss of teeth also had significant consequences for nutrition. As women lost more and more teeth, chewing became increasingly difficult. This meant they might resort to a diet of soft, easily digestible foods, which might not be nutritionally complete. Their ability to extract nutrients from coarser, more fibrous foods would be compromised, further exacerbating issues like anemia and general weakness. This could lead to a vicious cycle where poor dental health contributed to malnutrition, which in turn weakened the body's ability to fight off new infections. Beyond the physical pain, there was also a social and psychological impact. Missing teeth, particularly in the front of the mouth, could affect a woman's appearance, making her self-conscious. It could also impair her speech, making it difficult to communicate clearly. While such dental issues were common, it did not lessen the personal distress for those afflicted. It was a constant, visible reminder of their suffering. Medieval artwork and literature often depict figures with poor teeth, indicating its prevalence. The relentless march of dental decay and eventual tooth loss was a universal experience for women in 1230. It was a source of chronic pain, infection, and significantly compromised their ability to nourish themselves effectively. Tooth loss was a battle lost in the silent war against microorganisms, a testament to the lack of understanding of oral hygiene and the brutal realities of medical care in a world where a simple toothache could lead to life-threatening complications. The women of 1230 lived with a constant, nagging anguish in their mouths, a pain that gnawed at their comfort and their very ability to survive.